Good afternoon. Thank you for having me in the summer school, and apologies for not being able to be there with you live in Bergen. I'm trying to make this as interesting as possible, which is not so easy. I realize you're looking at me on a screen. But still, the topic is too important to let this go by, this opportunity. I will be speaking about the whole child in a whole school as a way to cultivate agency and hope in what we might consider a troubled world. I think it's a timely topic, and we only need to look at recent reports from, say, the IPCC on the changing climate to know and to realize that especially younger generations will be severely affected by our climate changing world, and the prospects for living meaningful lives where people can live in solidarity and can be living in harmony with planetary boundaries are diminishing quite rapidly. So we have a window still of opportunity to reorient everything, really, education, governance, and business towards sustainability. I want to focus in on early childhood, which is not to say we should ignore older generations or my generation. I'm 59, and if I'm lucky, I still have about 30 years on this planet. So it's too naive to kind of skip my generation, as we have an enormous ecological footprint still in the years to come. Early childhood is very foundational for anybody, and what we do in those early years has a ripple effect for the rest of children's lives. And you can see a child born in 2020 in this graphic will be affected a lot more by a climate changed world than I will be. So we need to also look at the root causes of climate change. We tend to talk about adaptation a lot, but we also need to be proactive and look a little deeper at what is underneath. And when we do that, I mean, this is not an intuitive graph that I'm showing you now, but you could say that biodiversity is rapidly declining. We're in the era of sixth mass extinction, and this time it's caused by one single species, which is Homo sapiens, which is also true for climate change. You could say the climate has always been changing, but over a period of billions of years, changes have happened, and now in less than 200, changes are happening that are caused by one single species, which makes this also Homo sapiens in a way responsible for what's going on the planet. Biodiversity rapidly going down. At the same time, you could say that consumer product biodiversity is rapidly increasing, exponential growth. And a lot of innovation, education, capacity building is serving the world of business to help them become more creative in selling things, nudging people to buy things that maybe they need, maybe they don't need. Here you have a typical grocery store just showing the hair products that you can buy, and the diversity is enormous. And you could even go in certain sections, you will find shampoos for pets, for dogs and for cats, which on the one hand you might say, well, we have to pay attention for other species as well, and the non-human animals should also have good care of their hair. But at the same time, we must also begin to question all this innovation to drive consumerism, and the side products of that include pictures like this, plastic soup, plastic rivers. These are the macroplastics, but even bigger concerns might be the nano and the microplastics that are even in our toothpaste and entering our bodies, and not just our bodies, also the bodies of many other species. And this young man in Southeast Asia is trying to make a living out of plastic by selecting the plastics that may have some value that he can take to the market and still generate some income of the river, where in old days local people were fishing this river and had a lot of local knowledge about the river. That knowledge is no longer relevant because there are no fish anymore in this river. So the deeper causes also have to do with the kind of consumerist lifestyle that we have been cultivating and exporting all across the world, which is why some people don't speak about the Anthropocene, but rather the Capitalocene, pointing at not so much at humans as innately guilty of destroying the planet, but rather looking at economic systems like capitalism that promote extractivism and exploitation and the commodification of everything, even of education and even of children as input, throughput, output. And this kind of thinking is highly problematic. And we also know that young children, this on the left, Juliet Shore's book, showing that young children in Canada at the age of 3 can already distinguish up to like 100 different brands, which is quite concerning. Or a lot of children who are glued to smartphones and electronic devices, sometimes 80% or more of their waking hours, being nudged to share what they like, how they feel, and what they prefer, and being targeted by companies. So a commercialized childhood is often what many children are experiencing today. And in some ways, big tech is co-parenting our children. Here's a New York Times article where parents also are on these devices, and they kind of outsource parenting to the technology. Because when you're having a conversation with your children or taking them out for a walk in the forest, you cannot be on your cell phone or on your tablet, and you're not making any NASDAQ company any money. So this is really deep, almost in our DNA, and we must also become very aware of how this is shaping childhood and how the corporate commercialized world is affecting education. And especially it's becoming problematic when education is becoming an extension of the globalizing economy, because then education is not serving people and planet, but it's fueling a kind of a consumerist system where people can buy things 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, by pressing a button and having it put in the shopping basket and having it delivered the next day on your doorstep. And this is not just in the global north, this is happening all over the world more and more. And even in poor countries where people do not have access to clean drinking water, they do have access to smartphones, to 3 and 4G networks, and are also being targeted by the same companies that are able to extract money even from those who are very poor in this way. So, yes, these tech companies like Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and Snapchat, they have morphed into a society-wide incarnation of these what this author calls brothering grim monsters. They pose as caregivers, they cultivate affection and attachment in children, use psychological insights to prey on their weaknesses, patiently fattening them up in a way that is train them in consumption, all the while viewing children as profit centers. This is a rather bleak sketch of what might be happening at the moment. At the same time, young children are not immune to information about things like climate change or poverty or widening inequality, some experiencing it also, climate change. In Vietnam, for instance, young children are already facing floods or extreme droughts, and they, in their drawings about their experiences, they actually express these kinds of feelings. So we do live in a rather complicated time where all these issues around loss of biodiversity, climate change, but also increased inequality are interconnected in a way, and this is what we might call a very wicked situation without easy answers and no clear-cut solutions we can prescribe and then just follow a blueprint and we'll get out of this. No, it requires a much deeper reorientation of how we think, what we value, and it requires attention and being able to focus and concentrate on things. But in a world where we're continuously distracted and where we're drowning in information and in a way starving for wisdom, as the biologist E.O. Wilson has infamously said once, it is not surprising that people look for simple answers, even though they might be wrong, rather than to go a little deeper and look for the complexity. We have, in a way, built our education system to simplify matters and not to complicate matters. And this time and age requires that we complicate things, that we see connections, relations, interdependencies, and young children have an innate ability, I think, to see those connections and relations and using all the senses and connecting better in some ways than adults do. I'll get to that in a minute. It's also, and this is what I'm doing maybe right now, it's beginning to question the normalized, question the common and making it the ordinary, the normal in a way is, we normalize unsustainability and it's very difficult to live more sustainable lives because the structures around us force us in a way to join this project of growth, expansion, of adding value in economic terms, ignoring other values. So we also need to resist, in a way, these tendencies and trends and trouble some of these assumptions. So resistance pedagogy, building disruptive capacity, and I think young children, in some ways, they already ask questions. Why is this from an animal? What is in this meat? Where does this come from? And uncomfortable questions sometimes. And sometimes children have a very fine sensitivity for maybe inconsistency or maybe even hypocrisy or the ethical stance that is required to live more sustainable. So cultivating that kind of disruption and going against the grain is something that might be a very powerful capacity or competence, if you will, for sustainability. So questioning, also using disruptive kinds of technologies like the iAnimal virtual reality tool that shows how in industrial farming pigs live, for instance. You can walk through and see the whole life cycle of pigs and have a conversation about that. I'm not saying that young children should be entering that kind of conversation, but we do need to become transparent about these things, and we cannot always avoid these conversations. Keeping it from them is maybe worse when they already hear about it, but they don't get the kind of the tools and the capacities to deal with the emotions and the feelings, that anxieties that come with that. So let's speed up a bit and go to education and early childhood education as a critical catalyst, mechanism for the transition that we need if we are to live more lightly and more equitably on this planet. It cannot be business as usual that we often hear, but it cannot be education as usual either. So how do we move towards a transition towards a more just world that is safe for all people, including young people, because at the moment it isn't. Kate Raworth, the economist from the UK, she really, I think, developed a very powerful metaphor, the donut, to kind of show how we need to remain within planetary boundaries. We cannot change the climate, we cannot toxify the soils and the oceans and our bodies. We need to keep the ozone layer healthy. We cannot have too much fertilizer, nitrogen, phosphorus entering systems, which will lead to a disruption of biodiversity. We cannot have land conversion where we convert land forests for growing soy to feed our industrial, agricultural, animal production. In itself, kind of a rather odd term to use, animal production. So we need to learn to live within these ecological boundaries, otherwise things will maybe compound, they will become strengthen one another, and before you know it, these systems run out of control. And some people say this is already happening. At the same time, we need to learn to live more equitably. We need a voice, we need agency, we need peace and justice. If we don't have that, if we don't have this inner sustainability, then we cannot do a lot of good for outer sustainability either. So the social foundation needs to be there as well. Now, most of you have heard of the SDGs, maybe working with them already. You could say that some are at the heart of this donut, more at the social aspect, and some are more on the outside, connecting more with the planetary boundaries. I think the key, though, is that they are all interconnected. You cannot look at one without considering the others. We've done a lot of research, both in Norway at the Norwegian Life Science University, but also within Western Norway University of Applied Sciences in Bergen, the Kind Now program, where we have identified, some qualities, also at Wageningen, where I work most of the time, characteristics of sustainability-oriented learning. And they include dealing with values and ethics and moral dilemmas, and young children can also talk about moral dilemmas, also inviting diversity and dissonance, being exposed to other ways of seeing, sensing, looking, knowing is very important. Also, it feeds creativity. It does require strong connections and relationships, otherwise the diversity can also become a problem. Agency, transformative capacity, learning to make change, learning how to transform, experimenting and see how things affect yourself and others and the places around you. So if you don't get to experience that, then you'll never become empowered. So creating space for action is really important in education, and reflecting on what's changing, what's not changing, what's working with you, what's working against you. Understanding the difference between changing, between optimizing something and transitioning. The optimizing is often doing the things we do better, whereas transition has to do with doing better things. It has to do with a change in values, assumptions, and principles. And then the last component is systems thinking and boundary crossing. And that one, I always like to show this picture, which shows that, we've, over the last 200 years or so, we've really developed this kind of reductionist way of thinking, where we've become masters of drawing boundaries, creating categories, binary thinking, disciplinary thinking, subjects, but we've lost the ability to see relationships, to see connections, to feel connected with place, with others, with other species. So to think the world whole again, and to begin to connect ecology, economy, culture, but also environment, social justice, fairness, all these components of the donut, if you will. We need to learn to think in holistic ways. And I think young children have that innate ability to see these connections and relations. For a young child, the world unfolds holistically. It doesn't unfold in boxes and categories and disciplines. That's something that we teach in schools. And then we lose, in a way, that innate ability. And we need to relearn that. And we also need to bring in lots of qualities children have, like experimenting, playing, storytelling, listening to stories, these are qualities that are really, we tend to emphasize when children are, when people are young, but we kind of ignore them when people are old, and that's a problem. Um, just an example of place and connecting to place. Here is a classic study from the UK where you see that over time, over the last maybe 100 years or so, the place to roam freely as a child, in this case, great-grandfather George, who at age 8 had about 6 miles around to go walking, to go fishing, and to explore. But now, at that time, every generation, that space has been shrinking. And now, now children have maybe a few hundred meters in some urban areas. And worse, some children, they don't even get to experience place because they're driven to school with a car, or they're looking at their screen all the time, and they connect more with the virtual than with the real. And if there's no connection with a place, if you never immerse yourself and feel entangled with that place, why would you care for that place? So this idea of videophilia, where we're always drawn to the technology and where there's eyeball attention grabbed by, these smart people who think all the time about how can we get people to go back to their screens, at the expense of biophilia, which is really essential for sustainability, is really problematic. And you could say, what kid will remember their best day on YouTube, later on, and more green, less screen is another kind of slogan that I think makes a lot of sense. And I know in Norway there's a kind of a tradition of connecting with the outdoors, and also in early childhood, and there's also in the Netherlands there's talk about rewilding and also creating tiny forests in cities and the greening of school grounds. And this is happening in more parts of the world where there's a realization that being outdoors, connecting with place, can also lead to more well-being, slowing down, becoming a little bit more contemplative, and being able to concentrate better. There's lots of research that shows there's lots of benefits of this. Okay, a whole child, obviously, it refers to embodied ways of learning, but also emotional, socio-emotional learning, as well as cognitive learning, in kind of balance, this inner and outer sustainability. But this whole child needs to also be kind of part of a whole school that pays attention to this. And a whole school, this flower that we created based on some research we've done over time, and others have done a long time ago, but together with Rosalie Mati at the Norwegian Life Sciences University in Aals, we created this picture, and it shows that we need to think about what kind of curriculum do we have, to what extent can it be localized, be rooted in the live world of the young people, what kind of forms of teaching and learning are appropriate then, what kind of teacher training, professional development of staff, of management, but also people maybe cleaning the school or the concierge, people working in the environment, which are not just teachers and managers. Community connections, school, early childhood care center, and community. How does the school connect with other stakeholders, business world as well, but also the local government, elderly in the community, and so on. And also the school as a place where people eat, drink, they have to get to school, they have to go home, mobility, energy is being used, where there also needs to be some sense of inclusivity, diversity. How do we deal with conflict? So how can the school become a place where we experiment with sustainability, where we can practice and kind of walk the talk? Really quickly, I will go through all of these, but I'm just going to show them because I don't want to take too much of your time. But curriculum not as something that's fixed or frozen or handed down from above, but rather that is co-created with children, with adults, with the issues that emerge, and as a complicated conversation. Bill Pinar calls it that. That is more localized, more place-based, but also it's balanced in that it pays attention to what Gert Pista calls socialization, qualification, and subjectification, where subjectification has to do with your inner self. Who am I? Who do I want to be? Who am I becoming in the world? And what is keeping me from becoming who I am? And what's working with me and what's working against me. Identity, very important, yet not so much emphasized in our schools anymore. It's much more about qualification. What kind of capacity, skills do people need to work well in this globalizing economy, to be flexible in the work market, and so on, which is only accelerating unsustainability. So that's the curriculum, and there are lots of examples of children and young people monitoring local rivers and streams through citizen science, where the curriculum is much connected to place-based activities. In the left, a school that is looking at rainwater harvesting in neighborhoods to store rainwater longer so that it can be used in droughts. Also, vintage clothing fairs, where second-hand clothes are collected, shared. There's a kind of market. More schools are looking at circular economy, and children do this with toys, with the things they play with at home, sharing that more, bringing it to a kind of an exchange market, a library for toys, plants, things like that. Repair cafes, where there's intergenerational learning taking place. The pedagogy learning, inquiry-based, curiosity-based, obviously very important, but also looking at values-based education and the pedagogy of care, as Nell Noddings has introduced, and also using your hands and trying to build things, to make things, to work with materials so that you develop a relationship with the materials. That is very different when you create something yourself than when you, say, shop online for it and have it delivered the next morning. It's, again, relational. Another interesting movement also in early childhood is the post-humanist movement, the post-anthropocentric movement, where we are where we decenter the human in a way to make more room and to acknowledge the non-human and the more than human world, where we recognize that we are part of nature. We are, in a way, nature ourselves. You can even, maybe a radical view is that I am not I am we. I'm a multi-species entity. I have more non-human DNA in my body than human DNA. The way my gut works requires many different species. Without them, I could not live. But we don't really see ourselves in that way. We think we are some exceptional kind of species, and we are exceptional. I mean, if you can kind of destroy the earth, that makes you very exceptional as a species, although not all humans are doing this. But can we use that same kind of, if we're so smart, can we use the same kind of intelligence or a different kind of intelligence to kind of heal the earth and to regenerate the earth? That does require also decentering the human. Here we see people also connecting with materials, the building of things, and to develop a relationship with matter. Matter matters. I already talked about this, walking the talk and becoming this place where we can be safe, where we can experiment with sustainability, with health, with citizenship. And that is, I think, happening more and more in more schools, also in urban areas, using local grounds to grow vegetables, to have gardens, to take care and nurture, and to spend time together or sometimes alone, where you can kind of be yourself without having that pressure from excelling in school. Community connections, I think bringing together the world of governance, local government, but also the world of business, the bike store, the local food store, local farmers. How can they provide a very rich, in a way, curriculum for children. But we hardly tap into that, and we should develop stronger relationships. We do eat in school, so what is the connection between our food, between local food, organic food, and is it affordable? And if it isn't affordable, then why isn't it affordable? And what can we do about that? It's all there, but we do need to develop these connections. Capacity building, teacher competencies. How do we broker relationship with the community? How do we deal with social, emotional aspects, anxiety children have? Are we competent in dealing with that? And does our teacher training address this at all? SDGs, all these topics and how they are connected. Where are they? Do we need to learn about this as teachers, as school leaders, etc. Again, I'm referring to the group I work with at Norwegian Life Sciences University, but also in Wageningen, where we have created a kind of a toolkit for whole school approaches. You can see the flower on the butcher paper, where the teachers from the high schools, in this case, in the vegan around Ols and Oslo, are thinking about where are we already advancing, where are we maybe lagging behind, what do we need to do to kind of move towards this integrated whole school approach. And of course, there needs to be some underlying vision, a kind of ethos and the leadership to realize this. If you don't have that, then it becomes more difficult. Then the teachers who want to work in this way, they're kind of alone. They need to be supported. But that also needs to be a conversation that requires participation also of the children. They need to be a part of that conversation. Maybe to end there, there are some interesting new works appearing. Pedagogy in the Anthropocene, which is about rewilding education for a new Earth, by the Danish main editor Michael Paulsen and colleagues. I could recommend, but also Cultivating Hope in an Age of Global Threats is a wonderful book. Although it focuses more on children that have been maybe somewhat traumatized, but it's a wonderful book because it does emphasize that if we only focus on the diagnosis, if we only analyze where the problems are, and we gain more information and understanding of our predicament, and we do not provide an alternative, or we do not cultivate hope, then apathy, hopelessness will be the case. And that is problematic. And I think it's really important when we talk about sustainability, health, citizenship. It does, in this time and age, it does not have to be doom and gloom. It can be exciting, it can be fun, it can be rewarding. We need to get it out of that kind of air of it's difficult, without being naive about it. It's serious too, but let us also not forget that there are changes, there are niches all around the world that are beginning to tip, in a way, this normalized unsustainability towards sustainability. I'm not a pessimist. You cannot be pessimistic. That won't save the earth. We need to be optimistic about this without being naive. It is serious. We do need to reorient education, making it more relevant, more responsive, more responsible, but also more reimaginative. Then I think we have a good chance of turning this crisis around, certainly if this is becoming a worldwide movement, which I think, I'd like to think it is. And then in the end, our schools, our early childhood care becomes a more relational place, where we connect with each other, where we connect with other species, where we connect with material, where we see that where we are is always nested in a wider world, where the local and the global are intertwined, but also past, present and future are intertwined. And becoming aware of this and changing perspectives and having empathy and compassion for the other is one key stepping stone towards a more sustainable world, at least a world that is more sustainable than the one currently in prospect. And all the SDGs and the donuts, they're part of this kind of picture. And if that can become the kind of the moral compass of our education, also our early childhood education and care, then I think we can be even more optimistic about the future. With that, I talked too much already. I want to thank you. Hopefully you have some time for a conversation still with each other. My email is on the slide here. You can also send me a question. I'll try to respond. And I also have a blog, transformativelearning.nl, where I sometimes post articles and interesting ideas that you might want to have a look at. With that, I say thank you again, and thank you for listening.